I want to turn it over now, and what we did in order to get prepped to really understand what's happening in the association market is we partnered with Demand Metric, and we commissioned them to do a State of Digital Marketing and Association survey. And we did that because the association market, unlike other kind of corporate markets, the association market doesn't have a Gartner. It doesn't have a Forrester. It doesn't have some place where you can get benchmarking analytics to say, is my organization normal? And what we've learned from our clients over the last couple of years is that's the #1 question they want to know. Is what we're doing progressive? Are we laggards? Where do we fall in the spectrum? How are other people spending money? How do they have staffers? Are we behind in using Facebook? Are we cutting edge? And so that type of understanding of benchmarking has been wholly lacking in the association market, and we see that Demand Metric should be the organization that we use to analyze our market that we can go to. So we commissioned the survey. We had a couple of hundred responses, and so from that we've been able to understand and put together a report that will be available to everyone so that you can see the data and understand where you fit into this equation. So we're really excited to unveil these findings, and so with that I'm going to ask Jerry Rackley to come on up, who's the chief author and analyst of Demand Metric and has commissioned the study. So please welcome Jerry. And also it's like you're graduating.
Why, thank you.
That's for you. And I should say, for all of our sponsors and for our speakers, we have donated trees in your name to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation so that we can keep we can oxygenate the world and keep innovation going and keep on growing. And it will be some little trees will be out there saying HighRoad and Demand Metric and personify out in the world. So thanks again for that. So Jerry, take it away.
Thank you. I'm happy to talk about this research that we did. Whenever you do research, it's a little dose of reality. So I want to tell you a quick story about a dose of reality. I have 3 daughters. So one thing that tells you immediately is there's always drama in my home. But many years ago, my middle daughter, she and I were driving someplace together. She was pretty young, maybe 10, 11 years old. And we got into a very serious discussion about boys. This is a topic a father really wants to dialogue with daughters about. And she asked me some great questions like, how do I know if a boy likes me? And so I was trying to give her very serious answers and talk about relationships and romance and things like that. And she got this little twinkle in her eye. And she looked at me and she said, Daddy, have you ever kissed anybody besides Mommy? And I was like, well, yes, honey. I had girlfriends long before I ever met your mother. And so I went into this whole explanation. And so she sat there and thought about it for just a second, and completely seriously, she looked at me and she said, so did you used to be handsome? And that's no filter on this child, no filter at all. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, I think I used to be handsome. But anyway, that was a reality check for me, a little dose of reality. And I want to talk about our study that we did, the State of Association Marketing. First, I have to say thanks, because I have a feeling that many of you in the room participated, and we really are grateful for those who did. And so this is where the data came from. This is your data. My job was to help collect it, and to do the analysis of the data, and then to present it to you. And there is a report. So what I'm going to show you today is just basically highlights of the report. But here's the purpose. The purpose of this survey was for us to understand collectively how healthy is the marketing function in the association world. What are they doing? What are you all doing in terms of marketing, the different things? How well is it working? And then who's doing it? So the goal was to really provide the whole association world with some benchmarks. This is what it looks like. This is what seems to be working. And of course, from the data that we collected, we drew some conclusions. And we have some things we'll share at the end that we think are recommendations. So that is the report cover. Actually, we've changed the title. That's a draft. But this report will be available through HighRoad, and Suzanne can tell you about how to get a copy of it. I did speak yesterday, so some of you have heard this already. I'm the chief analyst at Demand Metric. We are a market advisory and research firm. Our sole focus is on marketing. That's all we do. I've been in marketing for a long time. What I do as chief analyst is I get to advise our clients. So we have clients that actually come to us on a regular basis and say, help us do marketing things. And so we do. But I also am the primary researcher, so I do a lot of studies. So in addition to this study, I've very recently completed a study on digital marketing, demand generation, referral marketing. So we're constantly in a state of doing studies. And then as I mentioned, Also yesterday in my free time, I'm an adjunct faculty member at Oklahoma State University. So I get to teach. I'm in the classroom on a regular basis, which I really enjoy. So quick snapshot of the survey, just to tell you who took the survey. You can see the statistics on the screen. Just over half of the associations that participated in this survey categorized themselves as membership. You see the other types there. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It is in the report in terms of the senior title. The most senior title in marketing at these associations that participated in the survey you see there, just about half with the director title. In terms of staffing, you'll see that we had, I think if I'm doing the math correctly, 71% had 3 or more marketing people on staff at the associations that participated in the survey. And then from a membership perspective, you can see there what the membership was for these participants. Very even distribution, which as a researcher, you love seeing that kind of distribution. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of who took our survey. Let's get into what it said. And the thing that we like to start with first is just a general question. Tell us, how effective is your marketing at your association? And now we understand that this is a perception question. And so to a certain degree, this is a little like you coming to me saying, Jerry, how pretty are your daughters? I'm not going to tell you, oh, they're terrible. I'm never going to say that. So we understand there's a bit of perception at work here, but the assessment was pretty high. 75% said, it's either somewhat or very effective. Since I do a lot of studies, we ask this question on almost every study. Tell us how effective your digital marketing is. Tell us how effective your demand generation is. So we have some not true apples-to-apples benchmarks, but we have some other data that kind of tells us where this lands. And this is a little bit above average in terms of assessment, just for what it's worth. A little bit higher assessment of effectiveness than what we usually see in our surveys. Now, what we did with this, it turns out that question of effectiveness was a really useful analysis question. So we broke it down, and you can see on this chart, 75% of the people said we're somewhat or very effective in our marketing, and the rest, the 25%, said we're either neutral, somewhat, or very ineffective. So we took those two groups because it became very useful to see what the differences are. And so as we go through this presentation, you'll see me refer to those groups, and we'll compare them to see some of those differences. And I think you'll find them interesting. So the next question we ask, and this is just really our attempt to understand the landscape. And so we said, all right, tell us how your communications are perceived by your members. Tell us what you think the members think about your communications. And so here's the data. And you can see that the assessment was pretty good. Most people said they're either always relevant and professional or sometimes relevant and professional, and very few said below that. So again, this is a perception question, but it's important for us to try and figure out what people are thinking about how the work is occurring. So now we started going into some specifics and saying, all right, talk to us about your capabilities. What are the things that you do when it comes to marketing? And here you see the responses to that question. And it's interesting that the top response was, well, we have strategic planning and capability. So that exists in our marketing function. It goes all the way down. You can kind of see through the bottom. The lowest ranking one on this chart, membership win back. And then the number of things in between that are very interesting to see where they all fall. So again, this is in the report, and you can access this. So I'm not going to tell you, okay, memorize this chart, because you're going to need to know it later. But do get the report, because I think you'll find some additional commentary there. So these are the capabilities. Now what we did is we took those two groups I just referenced, and we said, all right, let's divide them. Let's look at the capabilities across the high group, the high effectiveness group, and the low effectiveness group. And we just took the top 5, and here you see the ranking. So the capabilities listed there on the left, and then the low effectiveness group rank in the middle, the high effectiveness group rank on the right-hand side. So, okay, you take a look at that and draw whatever conclusions you want from it. One thing that jumps out at me is that right there. And that is the groups that say we are effective. We are more effective at marketing. Look what they're putting at number 1, strategy and planning, which is exactly what they should. Now, we're not saying anything below that's unimportant. In fact, I could make a strong argument about everything. In fact, yesterday, what was I talking about? Membership engagement. Very important. That's what the low effectiveness group has ranked first. Nothing wrong with doing membership engagement. I was encouraging it yesterday, and I would encourage all these things that are on that list. But what has to come first? And the strategy and planning has to come first. Because if you don't have direction, if you don't really have a goal and a direction and a place you're trying to get to by virtue of some strategy that you've developed, then it doesn't really matter how you get there, does it? Any road will do if you don't know where you're going. So strategy and planning is first in the high effectiveness group, and I think that's pretty significant. Now let's talk about some of the tactics, the specific things that associations said they were doing. Top two things are tied: email marketing and event marketing. And honestly, everyone loves to use email. Every study we do, email is right there at the top. But associations really love to do email. That's what I'm seeing here. This is probably the highest that I've seen. We're going to come back and talk about email some more. But you can look down the list. I would point out content marketing, which is, what, fifth in this list. And you can kind of go down the list, and we can understand maybe why print advertising is lower, and mobile marketing is still kind of in that space where people are trying to figure out what to do with it. So that's just the ranking. Not much to say other than it's interesting to see. But what is useful to do is to take the effectiveness. So we asked the usage. That was the previous slide. This slide here is now saying, all right, score those things on effectiveness. So here you see, once again, email at the top of the list. Now the order has changed a little bit. I don't expect you to have remembered everything on the previous slide, but you'll notice that content marketing here has jumped up to 3 in terms of effectiveness. It was 5th in terms of usage. And so the order of some of the other things have changed a little bit. So that's interesting to know. What's probably more helpful to know is let's take a look at usage and effectiveness. Okay? So we took the top 5 things, and this is a little bit of a busy chart, so let me try and decipher it for you. On the left are the top 5 tactics in terms of usage. And then we have our 2 groups. We compared the effectiveness ratings from the low group and the high group, and then I put the delta on the right so you can see the difference. So if you take a look at this, you can see that every single one of these has a double-digit delta except for events. And of course, the high effectiveness group is claiming greater effectiveness for each one of these tactics. There's the big one that jumps out at me. That's where the biggest delta is on content. And why I think that's such a concern, or should be, it should be a concern, if you haven't figured out how to do a great job with content, is because almost everything else you do from a marketing tactics perspective relies on content. So just think about that. If content is fueling most of the marketing things you're doing, you can't afford for it to not be effective, because it's really important to so many other things we do. So I saw that and I thought, all right, that's a big area of concern, or if you want to put the positive spin on it, it's an area for improvement. But that's one thing that we saw in this data. Here's something else that we saw. So we asked a lot of questions about who owns the strategy, who owns the execution, who owns the measurement of all the things you see in the leftmost column, all those responsibilities. So you go down there and you can see marketing pretty much has it all, except for a couple things. And marketing owns everything, but let's look at email newsletters. So if you remember, we go back a few charts. What was the most effective and the most used marketing tactic? Number 1, email. So if you look at this chart, and I think you just have to ask, so if that's the most effective marketing tactic and the most used marketing tactic, does it bother anybody that marketing doesn't own that? Because the data here says they don't. They own what's interesting is look what they do own. They own the measurement, but they don't own the strategy and they don't own the execution. So when I see that kind of inconsistency, it raises a few red flags. Like, okay, there's potential for problems. I'm not saying it's a problem, but I'm guessing it probably is. So that one kind of jumped out at me, the fact that marketing doesn't own the most effective and most frequently used tactic. I think that's a bit of a disconnect and points to some fragmentation, which we talked about some yesterday. All right, now in the survey, we also asked a question, and it was a really long question. So those of you who took our survey, you might even remember when I presented the question, I put kind of a thanks in advance for your patience answering this long question. This is one of 2 slides. There were so many things that could be in a digital marketing portfolio, I couldn't fit everything on one slide. So this is the first slide of 2. And so you can see, once again, look what's at the top. Email newsletters, no surprise, that's the top most used thing in the digital marketing portfolio. We've got social media, we've got some Google Analytics, and you kind of go down through the list. So let's look at a couple things. One is, no surprise to see what's at the top. That validates the other data we saw in the survey, but here's one thing that did jump out at me. I saw this and I thought, scratched my head a little bit. Take a look at the next to the bottom on this chart, the email preference center. So my interpretation is, 88% are doing email newsletters, but less than half have an email preference center. So lots of questions come from that. How are you ensuring compliance with canned spam? And how are you handling those unsubscribes? And all those things that, and I know there was a discussion yesterday, and I've even seen it on the tweet wall. When someone gives you permission to email them, don't abuse it. That was one of the tweets that I saw from a presentation yesterday. And so this disparity here kind of tells me, all right, so there's probably some abuse. Maybe it's unintentional, but it's still abuse anyway, right? So that was one thing I saw from this. Here's the other thing. At the very bottom, the incidence of blogs is pretty low. Less than half of the people said a blog is part of their digital portfolio. Blogs are so important from a search engine optimization standpoint. And maybe the reason why they're low is that a lot of associations don't realize what a huge advantage having a blog gives you from an SEO standpoint, how much more traffic you get. It's just a big advantage. And so that's an opportunity missed for associations. If you don't have a blog, you're missing a tremendous lever for SEO. So here's the second half of the chart. It picks right up where the last chart left off. This is part 2. So you can kind of go down there and see some things. And so let me just point out, based on these rankings, the big one right there, marketing automation. Something I'd love to explore more deeply. But the incidence of marketing automation in the association world, that's really low. That's probably half of the instance in, I would say, the rest of the marketing world. The adoption of marketing automation solutions is accelerating, as is the integration of those solutions with just about everything else marketers use, certainly with CRM. And a lot of the other things that we've talked about, even some yesterday with metrics, a lot of the email compliance issues, marketing automation addresses a lot of those. So that one to me is an area of concern for associations. That probably needs to be a lot higher. And then this one too is interesting. This is LinkedIn advertising and how little it's used in the association world, particularly when we see a lot of associations that are targeting professionals. This is where professionals live. They live on LinkedIn. And if you're going to spend money advertising online or social media, LinkedIn seems like a perfect choice for those associations. But the incidence of its use is pretty low, as you can see here. So now we turn to the distribution of tasks. And so we asked a question. And you can see in the left column here, we've listed some tasks. These are some high-level tasks that typically are marketing tasks. Everything from pricing, positioning, which certainly is a marketing task, the use of promotional channels, the analysis of data, and then even technology down at the bottom, which is certainly where marketing automation would fall. And so we asked the survey participants, tell us where these things fall in terms of who has responsibility for them. And so you can see the percentages in this table right here. And what was a little surprising to me was in only 2 of them, positioning and promotional channels do over half of the respondents say they own, that marketing owns. Everywhere else, it's really, really scattered or really fragmented. So this is evidence, in my opinion, of lots of fragmentation. Things that are marketing responsibilities, marketing doesn't own in the association world like they do elsewhere. Which, if I were a marketer, I think this would be very frustrating. Now, I'd love to hear from you on that, but that's what we see. So this is just the data. And I should have probably said this at the beginning. Whenever you hear survey data presented, you should ask the question, okay, how valid is this? How many people participated in this survey? Is this a true representation of the population? So that's a question you should always ask. Here's what I can tell you. We do pretty rigorous analysis of the data. And so, for example, I use SPSS, and when I share things like this data that you see on this table or in this chart right here, we have taken SPSS and examined the relationship between this and other variables in the study to make sure it's statistically valid. And so everything I'm reporting to you in this report and in this presentation has passed that test of validity. So it is valid, because we wouldn't say it otherwise. We have to have integrity in our research. So we think that's very representative. Now, your experience may be different, but this is what the sample in our survey reported. And now we have skills. And you'll see the skills in the column on the left. These are all technical skills. We've got SEO and SEM, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and I can't see the bottom one down. Well, I can't see it up here. Oh, it's API knowledge, if you can't read it because it's behind the chair. API knowledge. And I think for years, marketers have always been content to say, hey, that's IT. We're going to just shuffle that right on over to the IT department. But really, that doesn't apply anymore, because marketing is increasingly a technical craft, and there's some level of technical expertise you just have to have. Now, maybe you as a marketer yourself don't have it, but you need it in your organization. And that's only increasing as a requirement. So we asked this question specifically to kind of see, for some key technology areas, what is the skills situation? And here you see it. So where I've kind of highlighted the boxes in blue is where the largest response occurred. And marketing only got that in one area, and that was SEO and SEM. And everything else belongs to IT, and so marketing has to go to the IT department to get help from this. Maybe the relationship between marketing and IT is fabulous where you are, and this is not a problem. So that's great. But that's not true everywhere. We certainly know that more often than not, the relationship between marketing and IT is a bit antagonistic. And I think I referenced in some of my comments yesterday, Scott Brinker, who writes the Chief Martech blog, who talks about marketing technology and is really kind of the leading evangelist for marketing technology. He would tell you that technology expertise has to reside in the marketing organization. And even the Gartner Group has predicted that in a very close coming year, either next year or the year after, most marketing organizations are going to have a larger technology budget than the IT organization has, because that's how much technology that marketing consumes. So we think this is an area, certainly for improvement, where associations can figure out how to bring some more of these technical skills into the marketing department. Yesterday I talked about metrics. In fact, I shared this exact slide, but let's talk about it again. You can see that we have kind of this inventory of metrics that study participants said they use. Click-through rates and open rates, you would expect to see those metrics when email marketing is ranked highest for both usage and effectiveness. That's what we expect to see. As I mentioned yesterday, at the risk of repeating myself, those metrics are volume metrics that don't really directly indicate what kind of impact the marketing team is having, the marketing effort's having. The one that does better, that gets closer, would be conversions, but only a third of the organizations in this study said they're even tracking conversions. So we think that's an opportunity for improvement too, to be able to not only just track the right metrics so you can increase the effectiveness of these things you're doing, but also just to be able to go back to the organization and say, look, it's working. Your investment in us, it's paying off. And I don't think you can make that case just by tracking click-through rates and open rates and reporting that to the rest of the organization. And there are certainly lots of other metrics. This is just kind of a sampling. And as I mentioned yesterday, this is an area of great interest for me, and would love to have more metrics discussions with you if you'd like to do that. We talked about tools as well, and we said, all right, so what are you using to analyze data? What kind of tools exist and are in use? And so here are the results. I'm not surprised to see Excel listed at the top. And you can kind of go down and see, oh, the statistical tools, there's SAS and SPS hovering at 6 and 7%, and some other things. Here's the thing that concerns me is about the use of Excel. Everybody uses it. Late last year, so it's about 11 months ago, I did a study on marketing analytics tools. And we looked really closely at the different tools and the impact the use of the tools had. And here's what we learned about Excel. If you consider what has to happen in the analytics process, you need to have collaboration around the data coming out of the analytics process. And for that to happen, you have to have the sharing of data to occur. It has to be shared, easily accessible, and then collaboration has to occur around the data. And that's one of the things that makes analytics effective. When we did a study just a little less than a year ago on all these different kinds of tools, there was one tool and one tool only that had a negative effect on the collaboration and sharing that's critical to making analytics work, and it was Excel. So our advice has been, since that point and still is here, if Excel is the primary tool you're using for your analytics process, then you're using the wrong tool. I know you can get some analysis out of it, you can make it do some things, you can produce some charts, but it doesn't help you do what you really need to do from the sharing of data and collaboration standpoint. It just wasn't designed for that. And so you actually have to kind of do some unnatural acts to get Excel to really help you with those two things. Budgets, of course, are interesting. If you take a look at this, you can see the largest group said 42%. Our budget is less than $100,000, our annual marketing budget. Now, if you go back to one of the first slides I shared, and again, I don't expect you to remember this, 71% of people in our study said they have 3 or more full-time marketing staff. And the biggest answer here is, and a lot of them have apparently $100,000 or less marketing budgets. Now, these figures do not include salaries, just so you know that. But still, so we understand that there's a lot of challenges, and associations are always having to figure out how to do more with less. But that's the picture in terms of budget. We went a little bit deeper, and we said, all right, so let's dissect the budget, and let's understand what are some of the line items in your budget, and you can see that listed here. At the very top, we have web management. Right below that is email marketing, and it goes all the way down towards the bottom, data verification acquisition. Yesterday, there was a presentation on inbound marketing, which I would tell you, I think that's probably one of the top strategies that should be in use, and it falls very low on this particular list. A couple of things that I want to remind you of. So if I put back up the data on what the survey, you all who participated in the survey said was most effective, there it is on the left: email, events, content, and website or web and SEO. Okay, so if you look at this ranking of what's being budgeted, we can see website management's at the top, that's good. Website design is fourth, that's good too. But look where SEM, search engine marketing, look where that falls. It falls down there at number 17. And so here's the way I'm looking at it. You can build a great web presence. You can have a tremendous web experience. But if no one's finding that experience, no one's finding that, or presence you've created, because you're not taking the effort or doing the things you need to do to be visible, then where are you? And so, in fact, I did a virtual presentation just this week where we kind of had this debate over where should the emphasis be. Should it be on the search side or should it be on the web presence side? And the agreement was unanimous. It needs to be on the search side, because if you can't be found, if you have no search visibility, you're nowhere. It doesn't matter how great your website is. So the conclusion that we kind of pushed to our audience was search, presence, search marketing, search engine optimization, that's priority 1A. Website experience is priority 1B. So they're close, but you have to do both. You can't just do one or the other. You have to do both, and you have to do both pretty well. And as I mentioned, inbound marketing, look how far down the list it falls, and yet that's such an important strategy and a very affordable strategy. But you remember, look over on the left, effective task content marketing. It's an effective tactic based on the survey, and yet inbound falls really low. And so that seems to me like an area where there's just a big gap as well. So resources. We asked the question, tell us, what would help? What do you need? These first two answers probably surprised no one, right? How about some more staff and how about some more funding? And we hear this all the time. Every survey we do where we ask about what resources would help, this is on marketing's wish list year-round. It always is. So we just kind of expect it to be there, and it was. But here's some other things. More software or technology, more skills or competency, more direction from leadership, more creativity, more empowerment. So you start to see some of these things on the bottom, certainly number 5 and number 7. These are cultural issues. Talked a little bit about that yesterday, too. And in 8th place was just kind of the catch-all other resources. If you get the study report, we've kind of spelled out some of the detail underneath the other resources. Now, the other question was, all right, where do you spend your time? Day in the life of a marketer in an association. Anybody surprised about what's number 1? What do you think's number 2? Anybody want to guess? Haven't had enough coffee yet? Content creating, number 2. Number 3, internal meetings, the bane of our existence, yes? Internal meetings. I can't remember who said the quote, but I loved it, is, great things in the world, didn't happen because someone had a meeting. There was action, but it wasn't because, hey, let's go have a meeting. I'm very meeting averse. Number 4, how about this one? Changing gears to meet, this was worded a bit more eloquently, to meet new directions from the board or the C-suite, or I would just say changing gears to meet the strategy du jour is number 4. Number 5, posting to websites and social media. Now, by the way, the implication here isn't that this is bad. It's just, we just asked the question, where are you spending your time? This is what we got. Now, I think number 3 is not necessarily so good. Number 6, fielding member questions or emails. Number 7, data analytics. Now, this one I would tell you probably needs to be higher. I think more time needs to be spent on this one. And then data processing, number 8. So that's where time is being spent, according to our study. So what does all this mean? I've just kind of flown through sort of the highlights of the study. I want to go now into just some things that we pulled out of it that we think make sense in terms of recommendations. And the first one is this, in the area of leadership, specifically executive leadership. And here's the statistic. For 82% of the associations we studied, the most senior marketing title is director or below. Okay? So here's the implication. And you all can tell us that we're wrong about this, but the implication is that it appears in those organizations the senior marketing isn't talking to the board. Not because the senior marketer doesn't want to, but at that level they probably don't have access to the board. So, why is that a problem? Because marketing isn't just a department. It's not just a box on the org chart. It needs to be a cultural orientation for the entire organization. And for marketing to occur well and be most effective, it requires top to bottom collaboration. Everyone from the board all the way down to everyone on the staff level. And the marketing, senior marketer needs to be the ambassador for that culture and needs to have access up and down the organization. So we think the implication of the leadership piece here is that the senior marketer is not high enough in the organization to really do that. That's what we think. Here's what else we learned. We pulled out of the study just those organizations who said they have an executive as a senior marketer. And when we looked at those organizations that have an executive leading marketing, there was a pretty big difference in terms of how they rated their overall effectiveness. 89% who said they have an executive as a senior marketer said their marketing is very effective or effective. When we looked at everyone else, their effectiveness rating was 73%. So leadership makes a big difference. So that's one thing that we think is really important out of this study. The other thing would be strategic orientation. Prioritizing strategy and planning definitely leads to better effectiveness or greater effectiveness. We saw this when we looked at the organizations across the two groups I showed you early. One group prioritized this as number one, and they are reporting greater effectiveness than the other group. And if your marketing function is too busy to plan, it means at least two things. One is it's not oriented strategically enough if you don't have time to plan. And the second thing it means is whether you realize it or not, you've opted for lower marketing effectiveness. And I think I mentioned this yesterday too if you were present for those remarks. If your marketing organization basically says, we're too busy to have a planning session, to take a half-day planning retreat, we just don't have time, then that's what you're opting for. You're opting for lower marketing effectiveness. And also, I would just add this. For every study we've done, not just this one, the less strategic marketing is. In other words, the more of an order-taking organization you are in marketing, the less respect you have internally. That's just the way the relationship works. The other piece is embrace content. Content marketing effectiveness gap I showed you earlier is really big between associations that say they're really effective at marketing and those that aren't as effective. Big, big gap on this. And this is a problem because almost all the things you do from a marketing perspective need content. You have to feed them with content, and if you don't know how to create content, you are compromising your effectiveness. So don't be on the wrong side of the content divide. You just have to learn to effectively create and deploy content, and sometimes you need some outside help to do that. But it's so important you have to go get it if that's what you need to do. And in terms of ownership, and I saw some heads yesterday in the room nod when we were talking about this, it appears that the ownership and responsibility for a lot of marketing tasks, key tasks, is pretty fragmented. Marketing doesn't own them all. Executive leadership could go a long way to help fixing that problem. But we had a short discussion about that yesterday too. How do you take care of this? And I think it really is a leadership and cultural issue at its core. Marketing really needs to own the key marketing functions. And if it doesn't, it's a very frustrating situation for the marketing team. And I think it compromises the effectiveness of those things that marketing should be doing. And it's not. In terms of skills, we talked about this too. Marketing is more technical. It's only getting more technical. So marketing needs to be equipped with the skills. So what does that mean? Does that mean adding staff? Maybe. Does it mean training? Probably. And training as an ongoing thing to keep the skills current. And then metrics. We have to move beyond the volume metrics or the vanity metrics when we measure marketing and measure things that have greater meaning. The best metrics are the ones that help everyone understand how much contribution marketing's actually making. Conversion's good, but I wouldn't stop at conversion. There's some other things. How about cost of new member acquisition? That's probably a pretty important metric. That's something that most associations probably need to be tracking. So that's the kind of the high-level view. Suzanne, if you tell me we have time, I'll gladly take a few questions or comments, compliments, criticisms, whatever you feel led. But since it seems like you hadn't had your coffee earlier, I don't know if there's going to be any. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So I'm curious. Yes?
My question is, how many people completed the survey, and how many of them were actually HighRoad customers versus just general associations?
Okay. I can give you the exact number who took the survey. I don't have it locked up here, but it's in the report, which I have a copy of in my briefcase. Okay. It was, just to give you an example, we had two categories in this survey. Completed surveys, we had at least 200 completed surveys. We had even more partial surveys, and we were able to use lots of that data. And so we had, I'm going to guess, between 275 and 300 in the sample that we analyzed. Now, we didn't specifically ask them to tell us if they were a HighRoad customer, so that I don't know. I don't know that relationship. Now, Suzanne could probably go through the list and say, oh, there's one, and there's one, and there's one. That's not something I considered in the analysis.
Suzanne, do you have an idea of the percentage, potentially? Not offhand? Yeah, I was just curious because the thing about the email. Well, since you asked, no, I actually think that it's probably a high percentage because the email preference center piece, because obviously we push integration and email preference centers come with that. But what I find is when we talk to potential customers, prospects, it's shocking to me, but a lot of them don't have email preference centers. So that metric actually made me it was an indicator that maybe there was a lot of people that were not HighRoad customers that completed the survey, which is great.
So just to respond to that, so, if we just said who got the invite, if you will, to be able to participate in the survey, so that would be any list that we have at HighRoad. But in addition, and probably this is really where a lot of the survey participants came from, ASE was our co-partner in marketing that, and so they actually put that out to the entire into their membership, and so that actually, I'm guessing a lot of the data, especially also, I think also a lot of it came from that based on the budget sizes that were reported, and I think that came from a wide swath of the ASE membership. So I can speak to that point, yeah.
Good morning. I was wondering, one of the stats that really opened my eyes was 42% of associations have budgets, marketing budgets, annual marketing budgets of less than $100,000. I think the absolute number is interesting, but did you guys study or measure it as a percentage of their total budget? A lot of times you see within marketing it's 5 to 10, depending on where a company is or an association is on a growth curve. It can be 5%, it can be 10%, it can be 15%. But because there may be a lot of associations that had in that study that have small budgets.
Sure.
So kind of curious.
Yeah, and you know what? That's would have been a great thing to find out. And the answer to your question, the short answer is no. We didn't ask that question. As Suzanne and I were collaborating around the survey, just so you know, our survey design kind of parameters are we try to keep the survey to about 20 questions. Just because experience has told us when we go beyond that, we get survey fatigue and we get even more people who fall out and don't finish. Every time I've done a survey, there's always been a question or two I think of after we field the survey that, I wish we could have asked that. That would have been a great one. Suzanne and I talked just yesterday about the fact that this needs to be an annual survey. So maybe that's something that will make it into the next round if we're able to keep doing this.
And even so, can you speak from all the work you do? I think it's a really good point because no one ever knows how much of the overall budget should marketing be. It's a very hotly debated topic in all of marketing. But can you kind of give us some kind of typical measurements? Because I'm not sure that where I'm going with that is in the corporate market, it's far more out there, and people will tell you, I'm in growth mode. I need to be between, in order to really grow at this clip, I got to be between 15 to 30% of my overall revenue budget kind of thing. But I think in the association market, I don't know if those kind of quick, percentages are known. Can you kind of speak to on the corporate level, what are the typical kinds of spends that you've seen in other work?
And this question comes up a lot from clients because they're usually trying to justify their budget to their management team. But there's no single percentage that applies equally to all different kinds of organizations because you have some organizations that are very consumer oriented, they're manufacturing product and they're going to have a different kind of marketing landscape than a B2B business maybe that's selling software than an association. So with that kind of disclaimer, the percentage, the range that we see most often is between 6 and 10%. Yep, it'll go lower than that sometimes. It'll fall down to the 3 and 4% range, and it'll go above that to the 12% range. But 6 to 10 usually captures probably about 80% of what we see.
And again, probably a whole other survey we should do on just budgeting alone, because now I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I'm wondering, and this is a really question to everyone. What I've seen in my work with associations is that it's usually not even, the number is not arrived at by saying, what percentage should it be. It's more like you get $100,000. Like you're given the actual number. You don't actually get to say, for me to do this, I'm going to need this amount of money to be able to hit these goals, et cetera. It's usually like, you know, hello, here's your PIN money, and you've got $100,000, and of that, try to come up with, you know, the marketing for all of these events, et cetera, et cetera. So does that resonate with everyone, or do you actually get to say, I'm just wondering, because I think that's a good question. Like many times you'd say, okay, well, in order to do this effectively, I'm going to put together a budget. I'm going to put it at an 8% of our, you know, either real revenue or projected revenue, and then from there I'm going to break down the categories. And I'm wondering if that's something that's common in the association industry, or if it's a little bit more like, this is the amount you have to spend. Good luck with that. So any feedback on that, or areas of, yeah?
We, for our departments at MOA, we build our budgets based on our projects. But having said that, that doesn't mean that that's going to be your final budget. But we do start from a project basis, what we need to get done that year, and start our budgets from there.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by the survey. I'm happy Suzanne was working with Jerry and putting this together. There's nothing like this for the association market. So I was confirming with Suzanne, it is free for our clients. So I would highly encourage you. There are a lot of things in there that we're very close to the market, and so I had an instinct of those things, but it's nice to have data behind it. And so I've, again, encourage everyone to get this full study and take advantage of it, because there hasn't been that kind of study focused around the association market. Obviously, the reason we did it as a service to our clients, but also we're going to be using it for lead gen, right? So it is part of our inbound methodology where, in terms of trying to acquire a new customer, there's going to be a value exchange to get more information about prospects where they can download this as a white paper. And so just to kind of give you perspective on how we're drinking our own Kool-Aid, it's part of our content marketing.
And hey, there's a question from Twitter that's come in.
All right. Thank you, Abby, for the question on Twitter. She wants, Jerry, maybe you have some suggestions on this. What's the most effective way to present these metrics to a, quote, old school organization?
To present the metrics?
Right.
Well, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to do this study was so there was a third party essentially saying these things. So it's one thing if you are in charge of marketing at your association for you to go in and say all the things that we said. You can say, here's what I know to be true and what I believe based on my experience. Sure, you can do that, but unfortunately, in my own experience, I don't have the clout or the credibility to have those claims believed when I make them. So what we hope this study has done to answer this Twitter question and just to make the statement in general is provide you with a very credible, valid piece of research that holds up to statistical scrutiny, that has a really nice sample associated with it, and that you can take and say, look, it isn't just me. Look at this research. This has implications for us. We need to do something about it. Now, what can we do? That's the best approach I know, but this question goes right back to a cultural issue and a leadership issue, and sometimes those are the hardest ones to deal with. So I wish I had that answer that works, surefire 100% of the time. But that's the advice. That's why I think you need to get this study, and you need to sit down with the stakeholders in your organization and go through it together and look at what do we need to do based on what this is saying. That's what we had in mind when we did this study together.
We will be emailing this to all of you executive directors and board members on Earth. No, to raise these questions for you. But, that is exactly right. We wanted to make sure that we had a statistically relevant, a valid instrument that we can really start this discussion, to equip you to start the discussion so that we can, get this thing moving. Because I think the key points that came out to me in the whole study was that leadership culture, and I think we all know it because we all live it. But I don't think many of us, and this is over the course of the last year or so, I've had many, many, many clients say to us, like, we're with you, HighRoad, we get it, we're loving you, this is what we're doing, and we get stuck right when we try to elevate the conversation, and can you help us with this? And this is really a direct response to that, to say, yeah, we need to elevate the dialogue, we need to we need to have VPs of marketing. We need to have chief marketing officers in the association industry. They need to be driving strategy, et cetera. We need more respect for our roles and more understanding about them. You know, it's not the promotional go send an email world anymore of what marketers are responsible for, et cetera. And we want to be able to push that because that's good for everybody. So I think that's great. Anybody else? Yeah, Dave.
And I got Reggie getting nervous around me because I just came back from the ASE Leadership Retreat, so I've got a lot of notes to come back to. But something that actually just in this discussion, the discussion with the leadership is about what do we do next. It is ASE is kind of driving the message of, you know, things need to change, things need to happen for us to be, you know, successful as we move forward. So I think the leadership, as I was kind of reviewing this for the first time myself, being at this retreat, is kind of trying to figure out what do we do, because there's some changes coming. You know, the baby boomers are leaving. There's a new generation of millenniums coming in. The markets are different. How do we communicate? How do we grow the membership? And I think the growth is the part that I think for a lot of the leadership, they're starting to understand that, hey, we need to grow. It's no longer a member retention model. It's more of a how do we generate more opportunities, more membership. And with that, my recommendation to those that want to drive this upper discussion is really to make these organizations survive, to make them grow. This is what we need to do. And I think Reggie and I, during the discussion, were looking at each other a few times because it was a discussion that we had in Louisville just a day ago. So.
Reggie, can I call you out? Because ASE is one of the exact. Since you're here, Reggie, I'm going to call you out. It is. I mean, it's one of the kind of few, and I know Rob's not here, but it really is an association that has a CMO, that has a CIO, you know, that has a full, if you will, executive suite like you would see in a corporation. You know, it has that model. Can you talk about that a little bit?
In fact, Rob and I sit right next to one another and probably spend more time in each other's office than we care to talk about. But part of what we're trying to drive our marketing team and our technology team to do is to not come at us with data, but come at us with answers. So our expectation is, get these studies, but when you come back, don't come back and show me the study, because oftentimes, for whatever reason, either we don't have time to look at the studies or we're not smart enough to interpret the studies. But sit down and figure out, what does this really mean for the organization? How do you move the organization forward with this data? I think even if it's controversial, it at least starts the conversation.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else coming through Twitter or other comments, questions? Yeah.
Where you would recommend in place of Excel for analyzing and also sharing data?
Well, yes, I'll give you a recommendation, and I don't want you to assume that this is based on an exhaustive analysis of all the possible solutions out there. But one solution that I know is used very effectively is a solution from Tableau. It is a data visualization solution that also has a lot of analytics capability. And what's nice about it is designed for sharing. So you can build some dashboards with Tableau. It has the ability to go grab data from different places and dynamically keep those dashboards up to date. And it produces amazingly beautiful graphical dashboards. And so I like it. It's one tool that's pretty easy to use. It's not terribly expensive, and it just does lots of good things. So that's the short answer.
And wouldn't you know it, guess who integrates with Tableau? That would be HighRoad. Holla. And since we say that, and we did not plan that, but I'm going to give that up. I know Ron was getting all antsy in the chair, as I know he wants to say something else.
Around and shaking over here. No, it's actually, who do we have here from our AMS partners? We have, all right. Anyone else? So one of the things that was on the survey that from an AMS perspective I'd be concerned about is the fact that majority of the people are actually going to Excel versus using the tools that are built into the AMS. And what that is for, we don't know if it's because the tool doesn't have what they need or there's a learning curve there. I do know with Personify, they use basically a BI tool. It's OEM'd inside the software called, they call it Data Analyzer, but it's basically business objects. So it's a very powerful tool, but what I find is maybe the marketing team hasn't been educated on how to use the tool effectively, or maybe it's too complex, but it's definitely something that the AMS vendors are going to want to look at, right? Because they spend a lot of money on the AMS, so they're going to want people using that tool for the slicing and dicing. But to that point, we are working on a project now with one of our client partners where we're bringing back a huge amount of reporting metrics back into the AMS because they've developed a data mart, and they're actually sitting Tableau on top of it. And so it's part of a big program where they're going to be able to slice and dice all engagement with a particular member, whether it's email, surveys, attending live events, webinars, and calculating what they call total engagement. So it's really effective, and I find that tool powerful, Tableau.
So I think we have all of our questions answered. I want to say thank you so much, Jerry. And just side note, this is not the first and last time we're going to do this study. We have every intention of continuing to do this study on a periodic basis because we're very aware, and we believe, and we would like to have statistical proof that we're on the actual cusp of this massive wave of change that's coming into the association world. And Jerry and I want to study that and have the data on it so that we can actually see. So the next time we're going to try to go back and use this as a cohort study. So the next time we go back and look at this group, we're going to see the metrics and start seeing. One last thing, if you saw on our, when I was talking about the budget, I think the third item, anybody noticed, was print. It was still like 60% or something like that. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a key indicator for us over time, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see that start dropping, and you're going to see the other parts of the budget that were at the bottom, you're going to see that shift from print to digital, that we've seen in the corporate space. We'll see that continue to go. So with that, thank you so much.